Hello, I'm Tom Buckholtz. Shortly, you'll have an opportunity to view the presentation From Outrage to Outcomes, Let's Produce Pivotal Progress. A highlight of that presentation is a recipe that you can use throughout whatever you're doing to produce progress. The presentation does have some examples in it. Some of them are personal to me. The recipe is universal. There is a third presentation, and that's more tips about how to use the recipe. I hope you will view that presentation also. Let's produce pivotal progress. Doubtless, people you know are outraged at what is happening and what is not happening in our society today. Probably you're frustrated. It's simply too hard to get things done. Let's move from outrage to outcomes. Let's produce pivotal progress. During this presentation, I'm going to offer you a recipe for producing the progress that you want to produce. Before we do that, we're going to talk about some opportunities and problems in our society and then get on to how you can use the recipe to make plans and achieve results. Well, what is happening? For example, in education, there are millions of students, parents, teachers, administrators. They're working very hard, and there are some really wonderful results. At the same time, we read that too many kids are failing, and our attempts to improve the system are also moving much, much too slowly. In healthcare, we have treatments today that would be considered miraculous by standards of just a few years ago. At the same time, though, we read that tens of thousands of people die every year for medical error, and the cost of healthcare just continues to skyrocket. In transportation, it's true that every day thousands of people fly across the American continent safely and comfortably. On the other hand, it's been decades since we started to talk about the possibility that those flights could go directly, not by the zigzag routes that they still use. With today's routes, passengers waste time, airlines waste fuel and money, too much carbon dioxide gets put in the atmosphere. And oh, by the way, back down on the ground, how come we just can't get the potholes fixed? In politics and governance, we have many reasons to have balloons and to fly flags, but we're critically aware that the cost of participating meaningfully in the system is ballooning, and we also have ballooning deficits and debt that we're leaving for ourselves and for the people who come after us. In your own life, probably you're frustrated. It's just too hard to get things done. Well, is it impossible to do things? Certainly not. Our society has cured and conquered some diseases. We have great strides in transportation. Over the last few hundred years, governance has improved tremendously. We have new technologies that improve our lifestyle and our flexibility as to what we do. Doubtless you've benefited from some of these. Doubtless you also have some things that you'd like to see happen. So what's going on? Can we actually regain the momentum? Well, as I was preparing for this presentation, I noticed some things in the news. For example, Walter Cronkite, the noted TV journalist, died. He used to end some of his programs with the phrase, "and that's the way it is." And I would suggest today we just aren't confronting reality the way it is. Also, folks celebrated the 40th anniversary of the first time people walked on the moon. In establishing the program that led to people getting to the moon, President Kennedy talked about organizing and measuring the best of our energies and skills. I'd suggest today we are not organizing and using the best of our energies and skills. So how can we produce pivotal progress? One more observation from the outside. Albert Einstein has suggested we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And I would suggest today it's not only the same thinking, it's the same actions, and it's the same lack of progress. So here's a recipe for new thinking and hopefully for really good progress. Let's start by relating the stories that we hope people will be telling sometime in the future about what's happened between now and then. Let's feature the outcomes in those stories. Let's talk about how people achieved the results, what plans they made, the opportunities that were key to the plans, how they built teamwork to see the opportunities, and how they gathered resources so that the stories actually occurred. This recipe can work. It has worked in the past. When I grew up in Palos Verdes Estates in the southern part of the state of California, my father related many stories about how his colleagues we're working very hard to block proposals to build boat harbors and make other use of the coastline and to make various uses of the city parkland. When I was about 12 years old, I saw an opportunity in all of this. I told my father there didn't seem to be any end in sight to the development proposals, but he could come up with his own proposal. Why not produce a wildlife preserve? With this story and some hard work, in not too many years, people developed and established the Palos Verdes Estates Shoreline Preserve. And for decades thereafter, the story has been that nature is taking its course and people have a wonderful resource to enjoy. The recipe can work for many, many other things. For example, in education, the stories I hear today tend to feature graduation rates, test results, the roof that leaks into the classroom, possibly adjusting class sizes, possibly making more use of the internet, the possibility that students will be offered more choice of public schools, maybe we'll have more charter schools. Maybe in the spirit of the quote from Albert Einstein, we should change the thinking. It's not so much about education, it's more about learning. Here the stories are of learners and teachers. It's of people learning from the past, having great learning experiences in the present, and preparing for the future. We can apply the recipe. We can think well and do great. We would start again with what stories will people want to tell in the future? And then we can proceed with the pivotal questions. What will people need to learn so that those stories actually occur? How best will people learn such? What learning experiences will people plan? What opportunities exist to foster learning? How will resources work together? Who and what other resources will join in? For example, to the extent that you believe that a person learns something really well when they're ready to learn it, and to the extent that they really need it, then you can join in and produce learning experiences by taking things from the internet and other sources that are available. This is a great recipe. I hope you'll use it. I hope that you'll take some of the frustration out of what you're doing. You'll formulate the stories, go for the outcomes in those stories, and produce the reality that is in those stories. It's really quite straightforward. You'll need to plan, and when you plan, I'd suggest at critical junctures, for example, when you start and when you're frustrated, go back to the stories and start your planning from there. Planning is not enough. You need to achieve something. Here, you'll be continually gathering resources and building teamwork. As that happens, people will see new opportunities. They can make the plans and achieve the results. You can realize the outcomes and have stories that people will be proud of. The recipe is straightforward, but it may take a lot of work. Support is available. Think of people you know. Think of people who know you. Think of people who need to be in the stories. Get them together. Think broadly and get good perspective. Think topically and decide what you really need to do. Then get going and do something. The choice is yours. You can stay with the failing systems and the failing results and the growing outrage, or you can build your coalitions, think better, and get going. I would suggest that if you take this path, then in fact we can fix the systems, get the great results, and have stories we'll all be proud of. The choice is yours. Let's produce pivotal progress. I hope that you were inspired by the presentation from Outrage to Outcomes. Let's produce pivotal progress. In this presentation, I'm going to talk more about the recipe and how you can use it. In particular, we're going to ask a pivotal question. We're going to talk about what people may need to learn to be part of your initiative to produce pivotal progress, and we'll note that there is some other support available. The recipe, of course, starts with the idea that you want to relate stories about the future and then work to make sure that they come about. And as you do so, I'd encourage you to ask the question, to what extent, more than working with, is it choice A or choice B? For example, when my father and his colleagues were combating those proposals to build boat harbors and make other developments in Palos Verdes Estates, they saw things as a problem. And you can ask, to what extent is something a problem? To what extent is an opportunity? They were reacting to the problem. I happened to see several pieces of opportunity in what they were doing. Number one, they were learning that people could submit proposals. Number two, they were gaining political skill to make things happen. And number three, with my idea of producing a wildlife preserve, they had a real opportunity to rally around and to turn from reacting to acting. Also, you can use the question to what extent in thinking about to what extent are we talking about mechanisms, to what extent are we talking about needs. For example, in the presentation, we talked about education as a mechanism or system. We talked about learning as a need, and learning provides this wonderful context so that you can actually make good steps to fix education as a system. If we'd had time in the previous presentation, we could have talked about healthcare. Healthcare is a system, wellness is a need. Healthcare can support getting to wellness, and indeed within the healthcare system, healthcare finance can support improving that as a system. We can also use the recipe for gauging what people may need to learn or to learn to do better in order to participate in our initiatives. For example, in the outcomes area, people may need to learn to be better at observing, at measuring, at ascribing meaning or ascribing value. Or for gathering resources, you may find that people need to learn to be better at finding and using data, at being well, for example, well enough to participate, at recruiting, or at teaching. Well, this seems to be a very versatile recipe, and I encourage you to think of it for many, many applications. You may wonder where it comes from and whether you can benefit from the source. In the spirit of the quote from Albert Einstein, I've developed some thinking tools which I call direct outcomes. And I really hope that people will use them to think in new ways and get beyond the behavior of today. I hope in particular that you'll be able to use them to gain good insight, to make better decisions more easily and more quickly than you would have otherwise. One of those tools is called Achieve Progress, and the theme for that tool is what? What do people need to do in order to get something done? This is the tool from which I developed the recipe. There are other tools. For example, if you're talking about to what extent do I want to go down path A or to what extent do I want to go down path B, you can use Achieve Impact to ask about the so what of either path or some combination of the two of them. Achieve Purpose is really good for exploring the what and why of goals, and you can use Achieve Group to understand who is part of a coalition that you have or who needs to be part of the coalition as you build it out. There are 4 other tools. One deals with relation, another with synergy, another with style, and another with method. For example, I'd really encourage you to use the Achieve Style tool when you're trying to figure out how well do we need to get something done. So you have some new tools to put in your kit of support. Support is not only what you might have thought of while you were viewing the presentation. You might want to engage me, and you might want to learn, use, benefit from, and even teach the direct outcomes thinking tools. For that, there's an ebook available called Innovate Incisively, Gain Impact, Save Time. Support is available. The choice is yours. Let's produce pivotal progress.